Hello there, Internet! Welcome to another episode of Weekly Art Tips. I'm your host, Ando, and today we are going to be looking at Destotim. We have two images to look at, so let's dive right in. Alright, so the first one is Awkward Me. And just a quick note on both of these images, they are going to be traditional media, and they are both with marker. So, anyways, so let's talk about this first image. The first thing I really noticed about this image is that it has a very nice sense of atmosphere. The colors are very soft and light and bright, and it really brings across just like the feeling of happiness and joy. So I think you did really good with your color picks. Another thing that I really like about this image is the way that you decided to do the shading on the skin. I think that it's very successful, especially on the ear here. One thing that would be a little nicer to see on just the skin drawing itself, to make it a little less two-dimensional, you should add a bit more shadow on this part of the face, because it just brings the back of the head further back and then brings the front of the face, which should be the lightest part, given this lighting scheme, and it would bring that forward. So just to make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. If three-dimensional is not what you're going for, then I think it looks fine the way it is. One thing I do want to mention about this image is that you have really minimal line work going on. You really only notice it on mostly the skin, because in the hair and the shirt, the colors are dark enough that it brings that out of the focus. So you mostly notice the line work on the skin. So I'm thinking that it would be a little more interesting to see a bit more line variation. So just having like maybe thicker line work in some areas, just to kind of break that up and make it look a little less like of the same line thickness. So it would add a bit more interest to the line work that you've done. But the line work that I see is very nice. I especially like the line work that you did on the hairline. That's really nice and soft, and it tapers very, very nicely. I think it would be really nice to see a bit more exaggeration with your lines on the skin part, because that is, like I said before, the area where the closest to a lighter color than a darker color. Because I'm not really noticing it so much in the hair here. So that could be something that you could play around with if you do not feel that that's really necessarily what you were going for. Then that's fine. That's just something that I personally would suggest doing. One other thing that would be really cool to see, I noticed that you mentioned that you did blending in your comment section. So I think it would be kind of cool to see a little bit more exaggeration with your blending, because you can see a little bit more liney work on the hair. I don't know if that was meant as texturing or not, but the way that it looks to me right now is that it's kind of like that line that you get when you're coloring with a marker. So maybe just blending that a little bit more in some areas would help that out a lot. Because I believe I mentioned it in an earlier video, but one of the things that people tend to do a lot when they're starting out is kind of this tendency to draw every single hair follicle, and that's not necessarily how you see people's hair when you are looking from a distance. You would normally see shapes of light, and in that you would see kind of like an outline of where the hair highlights would be, but you wouldn't necessarily see very many strands unless the strands are picking up bright highlights, like a couple of white like lines that would kind of represent very, very drastic highlights on the hair. I'm not sure if that's really coming across, but like what I'm talking about is when you kind of see the silhouette of people's hair and they have these kind of little flyaway strands. Those would tend to be a little bit brighter. Also, you might have like a couple that are sticking out in just like specific key locations. Those would probably end up being brighter, like a bright white or something. That's more for a naturalistic style. If you're going for more of a two-dimensional style, then really it just depends on how you want to color it. But I would just kind of recommend smoothing out a couple more of these areas, because like you have this one smoothed out a bit more, but just a couple of these lines are really sticking out to me, and I feel like maybe blending those a little bit more, or maybe even adding a couple other extra colors in there would add a bit more intrigue to it and make it look like a lot more streamlined and intentional in your line work. So it's one of the hard things about art, is trying to make everything you've done look incredibly intentional and not wasting a single extra line or an extra color or anything. So that's what everyone strives to do, is just do the most with the least. So I don't know if that makes sense, but maybe one day it will. So anyways, moving on from that, one thing I wanted to mention about the anatomy is that I really do like the fact that the head anatomy is pretty spot on. You have like a very well-defined cheek, you have a defined chin, and your ear is in the correct location, so that's really awesome. One thing I will mention that is a little bit off is the neck location, because the way that the head works is the neck would be a little bit farther back, like this, and even if you're looking down, you could see the head and the neck kind of more like this, but the neck always has a bit of a slope inward. It's never necessarily going to be straight up and down on like a more naturalistic body style. If you're going for like more of a caricature or like a cartoon, then it really doesn't matter, but this looks more detailed and more anatomically correct, just judging by the way that you've drawn the head and just the way that the neck and the shoulders kind of complement it. So I feel like either bringing the neck back a bit or having it tilted a little more outward would end up looking a lot more anatomically correct. Also, the shoulders are a little small for this, for the head size, but that's more of a stylistic thing, especially because there's more of like an anime feel to this image, especially the way that you have the eyes kind of doing a little smiley face thing. So, but yeah, if you're going for more of a like anatomically correct natural style, the shoulders would end up being a bit wider out, just because that is the way that proportion works. I would recommend checking out a couple of anatomy books to kind of get a more solid grasp on exactly how big the shoulders to the arm width to the head. They have a whole bunch of graphs that you can look at that would help you out with that. But if it's just a stylistic thing, then that is really up to you. That is just my suggestion if you are going for a more anatomically correct view. So, another thing that I'm going to mention, and I think this is going to be the last thing that I'm going to mention right now, is glasses. Glasses are very difficult to draw for me, in particular. I always have a hard time kind of figuring out exactly the angle of the glasses, and I think that you've done a really good job of kind of mapping in exactly where the glasses eyes would be. But one thing that I would recommend is that the way that the bridge connector right here, I'm not entirely sure what that part of the glasses is called. I feel like that should be nudged up just a tad, because I believe that they connect a little bit more in the middle of the glasses. If this is just the specific pair of glasses that you chose as a model and it really is that low, then I apologize for that. And you know, I take that back. I'm going to mention one more thing. I really like the highlight that you did on the lips. That is really beautiful. I'm a big fan of that. That just like little bright spot. That's really nicely done. Alright, so that's all I'm going to say for this piece. Good work. So the next one we're going to be talking about is Vulpix's version of me. And I really like this one. This one's super adorable. I especially like the expression that you have. It's a very annoyed, skeptical kind of look. I think that's super cute. I also like the way that you decided to make the glasses, because you can't really have the glasses connect, or the area that goes behind your ear. What are those called? Glasses sides. Okay. Anyways, you don't add those, so it's kind of like more like monocles, and I think that's really cute. Especially works with the stylization of the Vulpix, so that's adorable. I also am a big fan of these kind of blue highlights that you have in the eyes. That's really nice. It gives a more like ethereal look to the eye, and I think that it's very successful, especially with the color scheme that you chose, like with the tail and the hair part, the mane. I don't know, and also the fact that you have kind of like a greenish beanie on as well. So I think that that's really successful with your color scheme. And I'm also a big fan of the color scheme that you decided to go with just the fur in general. I think that it's very well done, and I like the shadows that you added as well. Again, I'm going to recommend kind of varying up your line work a bit, because just like the other one, the lightest color tone is where the line work is coming out the most. So adding maybe a couple more chunkier lines and kind of having a couple more tapers would end up really adding a lot, I think, to your line work. One other thing I wanted to mention is I feel like this one is much more shaded, like blended as well. With your color work, it looks a lot more intentional. Again, you do have these lines kind of coming in to the hair, which I feel like was supposed to be highlighting and stuff for the hair, but I feel like in that situation, it would be better to do more blending, and then maybe to add in some lighter colors with maybe some gel pens, or just adding on top of the image, instead of making darker lines to make it look strandy. That's just my personal opinion on that. And I also feel like in this area here, and this area here, it needs a little bit more blending in there, because it looks almost like watercolor blotches. I don't know, because I'm feeling like this is supposed to be shading, but just how dark it gets right at the edge, maybe a little bit of blending would make it look a lot more streamlined and more natural looking, because the way that it is right now, it's very, very abrupt when it goes from a darker to a lighter color. But, you know, honestly, this area does not bother me as much as right here, where it goes from, it's even darker. Like, this area is lighter than this darker area. So I feel like if you're going to end up having it be like a taper into the highlight on top, it should be a little bit more blended down at the bottom, so it looks more like one like solid block of color before it gets to the lighter color. So that's a personal opinion there. One thing that I really like, these little pads, these are probably the brightest, warmest spots in this image, but I'm honestly not very distracted by it. Just to clarify, because when you have a predominantly cool image and then you have spots of warm colors like reds, it's like your eyes would automatically be drawn to that area, but I don't end up doing that at all, because the lightest part of the image are these eyes right here, these little highlights, and so that's where my eyes go automatically. And the fact that you would eventually work your way down to the paws, you don't get stuck there either, because you end up coming back around to these really, really cool spots. So I think that that was really successful with your paw work here, and I really like the highlights that you did on the paws. I think that those are very well crafted. So yeah, I think that that was very successfully done, and like, good job on not having like a sticking point for just the way that the color scheme is. So that's not a very easy thing to do, and I think that you did it very well. And so the last thing I'm going to say about this image is just a little note about the beanie. it is kind of interesting because you do have line work throughout the rest of the image, and I'm sure you do have it on the beanie as well. It's just the fact that you don't have the lines very visible on the beanie. It looks like it has been completed in a different fashion than the rest of the image. So either maybe adding a bit more line work to the beanie, or maybe fading out the line work in another part of the image would just make it look a bit more cohesive, but that's more of a nitpick for me in particular. I really would only notice that after looking at this image for a bit. But all in all, I think that this is really an adorable image, and I think it was very well done. So thank you so much for sending it in, and I am glad that I got to see them. So thanks for listening, everyone, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye!